watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
Very recently, a woman named Anat Hoffman stood at the women's section of the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Now, many of you may know, and some of you may not know, that the Western Wall, sometimes mistakenly called the Wailing Wall by those who saw Jews weeping in prayer and therefore named it the Wailing Wall. But the Western Wall is the most well-known piece of the wall that buttressed the mount upon which the ancient Jewish temple once sat before its destruction by the Romans in the year 70. And that Western Wall, which is perhaps the holiest single spot in the Jewish tradition, is now fronted by a large standing area with a divider, what in Hebrew is called a mechitza, creating a men's standing area to its left and a woman's standing area to its right, similar to what one finds in an Orthodox synagogue where men and women are separated from one another during prayer. And so it was that Anat Hoffman stood in the women's section at the Western Wall, and she put on a talit, or a talis, the Jewish prayer shawl worn during prayer. And many of you do know what a talit looks like, but I'm going to show it to you in case you don't. Talit is often carried in a talit bag. This is my son Ari's talit bag. And a talit is a prayer shawl that one wraps around one's shoulders during prayer. Sometimes one actually puts it over one's head. And the important part of the talit are four large fringes on the four corners of the talit. These fringes are called tzitzit. And the tzitzit represent the 613 commandments, mitzvot, of the Jewish tradition. According to the Jewish tradition, women are exempt from certain commandments, certain mitzvot, because their work as mothers and homemakers are viewed by the tradition as so important that certain positive commandments which must be performed at a particular time are not incumbent upon them. And therefore women are not obligated to observe all of the 613 commandments represented by the tzitzit. And therefore women are not required to wear tzitzit or the talit. And if you visit an Orthodox synagogue, you will not normally see women wearing talesim, a talit, which is viewed strictly as a male garment. And so when Anat Hoffman wrapped herself in a talit in the women's section of the Western Wall, she was in effect breaking with Orthodox tradition.
חל עלינו איום שבהצעת חוק שעברה קריאה טרומית בכנסת ישראל, שכתוב שם ככה: לא יקוים טקס דתי בעזרת אנשים שליד הכותל המערבי, הכולל הוצאת ספר תורה וקריאה בו, תקיעת שופרות, לבישת טליתות ותפילין. העוברת על הוראות סעיף זה דינה מאסר 7 שנים. 7 שנים מאסר לאישה שמעיזה להתעטף בטלית בכותל או לקרוא שם בספר תורה.
Anat Hoffman was taken by the Jerusalem police at the Western Wall. She was fingerprinted, she was interrogated, and she was warned that she might be charged with a felony for violating the rules of conduct at the Western Wall. Many questions have been raised about Jewish life in Jerusalem and in Israel, the role of Orthodox law in the social fabric of the state of Israel, and the way in which Israeli law treats women in general in the areas of Jewish observance. And as you might expect, many non-Orthodox Jews believe Israel is making a serious mistake with these policies.
לכם שום הלכה בתורה. אין לכם שום דבר.
מי שעושה דברים נגד התורה מקבל גיהנום. גיהנום תקבלו על זה.
מה שנשות הכותל רוצות זה להיות אזרחיות שוות זכויות גם בכותל המערבי. את החירות להשמיע את הקול שלהם. ישראל מוכרת את הכותל כאתר של אחדות לאומית. איך אחדות לאומית אם משתיקים חצי מהאוכלוסייה? איך אחדות לאומית אם הבריונים שולטים בכותל?
And after Anat Hoffman's experience with the police, the reform movement here in the United States, actually the reform movement's group in Israel named Artza, but it's associated with the reform movement here in the United States, issued a press release. And here's in part what it said. One must wonder why the people of Israel tolerate a religious fanaticism that is no different than what we have witnessed in Iran and elsewhere. Israel is the rare democracy today that tolerates and even worse endorses religious discrimination against Jews. The promise of Israel's Declaration of Independence that Israel will be a homeland for all Jews appears to be nothing more than a dream. And that was issued by Robert Orkand of the Reform Movement's organization in Israel named Artza. So there's Strum and Drum in the Jewish community over these issues. And for some insight into this ongoing controversy, I am very pleased to be joined now by Rabbi Avraham Shafran, the Director of Public Affairs for Agudath Israel of America. And Avi, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate the time very, very much.
Appreciate you inviting me, Mark.
You've heard me sort of set up the piece. And by the way, you were kind enough to agree to actually sit with women who would also sort of raise their questions for themselves.
Without a mechitza.
Without a mechitza, that's correct. And they weren't all Orthodox women either. And it turned out that for various reasons, the panel we had put together fell apart. One woman who had agreed called us and said it turned out there was a conflict she'd forgotten about. Two other women said that they had to decline. They didn't like the way the panel was set up. And a third woman felt if the others didn't come, she couldn't come. And so what I said to you was I was going to try to ask the questions which I believe represent the questions that not only women at the wall would have, but also in general the questions you'd hear non-Orthodox American Jews articulate. And my first question for you is, if you were in charge personally of policy at the wall, would you have wanted the Jerusalem police to arrest a woman who had put a talit on in the women's section of the Western Wall?
Well, the short answer is no, but there's some background that's needed here also.
I'm sorry, no?
No, that I would not have wanted the police to arrest anyone.
Okay.
But the background here is that there are several facts that I don't think were presented the way they happened. I'm sure it was done inadvertently. But the bottom line is that no one was arrested for wearing a talit, certainly not in the area which was designated by Israel's Supreme Court for the women of the wall. What happened was that in the main plaza of the Kotel, women were wearing talitot, and by Ms. Hoffman's own description, which was carried in, wasn't verbatim a quote, but it was characterized that way by a very sympathetic reporter. She said that no one bothered them when they wore talitot. No one, not the police and not the people. What they had done was to secrete a Sefer Torah that they brought in a box or a small satchel, a very small Torah scroll, and they were about to decide on their own that even though that it's against the law, as the Supreme Court decided in order to keep peace among the various factions and people in Israel, they decided that they wanted to force the issue, and they prepared, as she put it, while we saw no one minded that we were dressed a certain way, we thought we can take it to the next level. Those are not her exact words, but that's in effect what she said. And they proceeded to take out the Sefer Torah. At that point, other women in the women's section objected because they knew that this would become a vocal display, which was what their counterparts in the men's section would have found offensive. And that's when the police saw that some altercation or some interaction was happening, and they came in and they arrested Ms. Frankel at that point. I don't believe that they arrested Ms. Hoffman. I believe that after the whole incident, a few days later or even a week later, they just took her, they asked her some questions. They questioned her and fingerprinted her, as is famously known. They did abuse her by not giving her a wipe afterwards to take the ink off of but whether there was any other police mistreatment, I don't know. It's certainly something that should be looked into, and Israeli police can be rough sometimes, and I don't defend any roughness that was shown to these women. But getting back to the question, this was clearly intended, again, not necessarily in order to cause ill will, but the effect of it was that this was intended to push the boundary of what is acceptable practice at the Kotel Plaza, and it was against the law. That's why the police had a right to arrest Ms. Frankel, not for wearing a talit, but for preparing to have a vocal service.
Okay, and I want to make sure everybody really hears what you're saying. You believe that the community in general at the wall would not make an issue about a woman wearing a talit.
I don't believe that anyone would, and I've heard from women who've been there that it happens more often than one knows. That's
that a woman does wear a talit?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
And you're saying that if it were your decision, that's not where you draw the line and send the police in.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I don't think I'd ever send the police in, but the fact is that there are laws, and I would definitely consider it to be an affront to those who expect a certain decorum there if a group of any sort, men, women, whatever it might be, came and tried to create a different type of decorum there.
Okay, now let's go to the issue of the Sefer Torah, and we should explain to our viewers, by the way, that in general, according to strict Jewish law, a minyan is made up of men, not of women. A minyan is needed to read the Torah in public, and that in general you would not see women reading the Torah in public, either at the wall or any Orthodox community. Am I stating it pretty much?
That's correct.
Okay. And so here you had women who, as you said, wanted to push the boundary. They wanted to read Torah at the wall, which would be a violation of Orthodox Jewish law. And for that you do feel, although you said a moment ago you would not even have sent the police in there?
The police are a totally different issue than what's proper and what isn't. I would like to see Jews live together and respect one another's concerns rather than have police be involved in any such thing. I don't even think there should be laws of such a sort. But the bottom line is that in order to prevent people from doing things that for whatever reason they want to do that do offend other Jews, apparently a law was required and the Supreme Court had to get involved. It's unfortunate, but
Okay.
It's real.
You understand, my instinct is that there are some Jews within the Orthodox establishment of Israel who would not agree with you about the use of police. They would be very happy that the police was enforcing the law at the Western Wall.
Well, I would like to see the law honored. When you talk about enforcement, I don't think anyone wants to see it needed to be enforced. In other words, what we would all like to see, my counterparts in Israel and even the people in the Knesset who brought the case or were involved in the case, what they'd like to see is simply peace and goodwill and honoring of other people's concerns, even if they're not one's own, at the Kotel. And the police coming in at the end is an unfortunate after effect of that, because laws are sort of meaningless if they can't be enforced. But I think what all of us would like to see is that there should not be a need for their enforcement, that the law should be, as it's supposed to be, a teacher of what's proper and what isn't proper. And the Israeli Supreme Court, which is by no means manned by Haredi or Orthodox men and women. There might be one Orthodox-affiliated woman, I believe, on the court. But that court decided that the best solution for to balance the determination of these women who want to see a different sort of a service at the Kotel, and the long-standing concerns of the Orthodox men and women who are there most often, would be to set aside a part of the wall farther down, which was sort of secluded for the women's service. They would be out of earshot of the men, though they would have the same access to the proximity to the temple or the temple site as anyone has. And that works perfectly fine. And I don't know of any Haredim who make a fuss over that. They know that there are women with talitot, with a Sefer Torah, chanting whatever they're doing, just a few hundred yards away.
Although I just read that there was this woman, a member of the conservative movement, who was arrested not in the women's section at the Western Wall, but further down. And again, what Avi is saying here is, if you ever visited the Western Wall, there's a piece which has traditionally been excavated early and has become the formal site of the Western Wall. But in fact, the Western Wall extends quite a ways down to the corner of the old buttress that held up the Temple Mount. And there are many places along that part of the wall which does not have this formal plaza in front of it, where any Jew, Orthodox or not Orthodox, can go. It's the same wall, and it has the same sense of holiness. It's just not the formal part of the wall that you always see in the pictures that has the mechitza in it. And so what, Avi, you're saying is that in general, your understanding is there are no Orthodox Jews in Israel who really make an issue of non-Orthodox Jews going further down along the wall, having a women's tefillah if they want it, or even if the Reform Jew comes with his own congregation, and lo and behold, men and women stand together, and there's a bar mitzvah service at that part of the wall. Your understanding is that the Orthodox in Jerusalem do not have a quarrel with anyone using that part of the Western Wall for a non-Orthodox service.
Well, I think the facts speak for themselves. It's been happening since 2003 or 2004, 12 times a year at least. That's on Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of each Jewish month. The women of the wall have a service there, and they do whatever they want to do there. And to the best of my knowledge, I've never heard of any problem.
So this was this story I just recited to you. That's not something you knew about.
No, not at all.
Okay, and instinctively you believe, first of all, if it happened, it was an aberration, and then in general, you don't feel Agudath Israel or really Orthodox Jews in general in Jerusalem would object to women coming together for tefillah, prayer of their own, as long as it's not at this formal piece of the Western Wall.
To the best of my knowledge, no one objects to that. That was the Supreme Court decision, that Robinson's Arch, which is this area you're referring to, should be set aside specifically for the women of the wall, and everyone knows what they wanted to do, and I've never heard of any problem with that.
Okay. Let me ask you now the question in general, philosophically. And you heard the Artsa response, the Reform Movement's response, and we had Julie Schoenfeld on recently, and she is the head of the RA, the Rabbinical Assembly, the organization of conservative rabbis. And she was offended by the way in which issues are dealt with regarding women at the wall. And the attitude that you hear American Jews articulate goes something like this. The Western Wall, the formal part we're talking about here, really belongs to the Jewish people as a whole. And a mistake was made to designate it almost as an Orthodox shul and to apply Orthodox traditions to something which is so public, belongs to all of Israel, if not all of the Jewish people. And that if one were going to have a mechitza at all, perhaps there should have been a second mechitza, separating the men's section and women's section from a third section of the wall in which men and women could stand together if that was the way they wished to pray at the wall, or women could come and do whatever they wanted to do at the wall, but that the wall would be bigger than an Orthodox institution. What's your response?
Well, starting with the end first, I think in effect that is what the Supreme Court decided, is that a part of the wall should be set aside for non-traditional, from a Haredi or Orthodox perspective, services. Not just the women of the wall who can go there, men and women can go there together also, to the best of my knowledge.
Exactly.
But getting to the more important issue, that it's an Orthodox synagogue, even though it belongs to the whole Jewish people, it does belong to the whole Jewish people. But the Jewish people also belong to the Jewish people. We have to be concerned about one another's, even unreasonable, from our perspectives, hakpadot, or insistences. And, well, last night I was talking to one of my grandchildren who's visiting from Milwaukee, and I asked her what she has for lunch at school, and she said a cream cheese sandwich. And I said, how about cream cheese and jelly? And she says, no, I don't like that. And I said, how about peanut butter? She says, no, never. I said, why not? She said, because we're not allowed to bring peanut butter into the school because some children have peanut allergies. Mm-hmm. It struck me that, just struck me right now, that that's a good metaphor, even though we're not talking allergies here, of course. But for a Haredi man, whether one likes it or not, it's a fact, just like an allergy. One doesn't like it, but it's a fact. A Haredi man is offended by hearing a woman's voice singing. And therefore, if a group of Jews get together and the women want to sing, but they know that there are Haredi men there who will be offended by it, or the Haredi men want to, I don't know, dance, and somehow it offends some of the women there, I would tell each of the potential offenders, we're family. Why do something that would offend your family member? And that's really what I think gets to the gist of the essential problem here, is that we're causing fights among ourselves when all there really are hakpadot that can either be respected or the opposite. None of us should be trying to do the opposite. And that's what I'm afraid the effect of the Women of the Walls coming to the main plaza is doing. I'm not saying their intention is that, but that's the effect of what's happening.
I'm sorry, the effect is?
That they're causing ill will among Jews. And they're offending other Jews. They don't want to. They wish that the Haredi men would enjoy their voices and not be offended by them. But if one understands Haredi culture and halacha, for that matter, Jewish religious law, one realizes that a woman's voice is considered something very, very private, meant to be done only among other women or men who are related to them. And it is offensive to them to have a public service where women are chanting from the Torah.
I understand. I want to try to articulate what I think they would answer you.
Okay. So.
Why is it equally offensive the other direction?
Mm-hmm.
And not only why is it equally offensive, the number of people at the wall who come from all over the world tend to be overwhelmingly not Haredi. And if one is going to be concerned about who is making other people uncomfortable, why wouldn't the state of Israel take the position that there should be a way in which the Haredi are respected, and there is some way in which they can have a piece of this wall where they would not be offended by anything they see or hear? But maybe that means they're near Robinson's Arch, and that the formal plaza should be one where the people who are respected are in the vast majority of the Jewish community. So that ultimately your argument has validity, but the women would put it upside down, so to speak.
Well, there are 3 points I think I'd like to make here. One is that whether the majority of people at the Kotel are Orthodox or not, I think is an open question. If you clocked people hours at the Kotel, where there are Haredim there throughout the night, and regular visitors, not just people who are coming from, for tourists or whatnot, I'm not sure it's true that it's not a disproportionately Haredi or at least Orthodox site. But leaving that aside, I don't think it really makes a difference because peanut butter. Because it could be one child in the school who's allergic to peanuts, but it's nice if the rest of the school, even if they have to forego the delicious peanut butter sandwich that they wish they could have, they're doing something out of a show of concern for the fellow student. And that's, I think, the perfect metaphor here.
Okay, again, I appreciate what you're saying, but I can imagine a woman saying, you are minimizing the extent to which this practice devalues Jewish women,
Mm-hmm.
the extent to which it's an enormous insult. It is not only an insult to those who believe that Orthodox Jews have every right to their mechitza, but that the truth of the matter is the Orthodox movement and Orthodox Jews are in the vast, vast minority of the Jewish people of this world, and most of the Jewish people are either secular,
unfortunately,
or they're very comfortable without a mechitza. But beyond that, you have here I was going to use the word desperate. I feel that may be pejorative on my part. A serious attempt by Jewish women, even within Orthodoxy, to say that the styles that have been imposed upon women, any woman has the right to be comfortable. And there are many women, by the way, who could come in here and they would argue in favor of mechitza. They do not consider themselves second-class citizens. It's a non-Orthodox view that Orthodox women are second-class citizens. Most Orthodox women do not see themselves that way and would argue in favor of Jewish tradition. But there are other Orthodox women and many non-Orthodox women who feel that the Jewish tradition has been created by men with a male orientation, and that what we are doing is perpetuating a system that devalues women in Jewish life. And so I say again, I understand the need to respect the Haredi sensibility, which is what you're talking about. There is, however, it seems to me, as valid a female Jewish sensibility, and there are men who also would argue against any form of sexism in the Jewish tradition, and that their sensibility also needs to be respected and in some way turned into at least social, if not actual, Israeli law.
Well, they're welcome to pursue that approach with the Israeli courts. I don't think they'll be successful simply because the vast majority of Israelis, though they might not be Haredi, are very traditional, and many polls have shown this, that the majority of Israeli Jews are, if not Haredi or national or religious, they'll call themselves Masarti, not in the sense of the conservative movement's Masarti movement. They sort of adopted that. That was a clever move. But Masarti means traditional in the sense that they have respect and they feel that it should be respected, Jewish tradition.
Avi, I want to make sure I understand what you just said. Do you believe that that polls in Israel show that the majority of Israelis, of whatever however observant or non-observant they are, you believe that the overwhelming majority of Israelis want there to be a distinction like this at the Western Wall?
I have no idea, because I don't know it's an overwhelming amount.
A majority at all?
Well, a majority in terms of tradition. I don't know that this particular question has been asked of them.
At the moment, one of the biggest things, the biggest social upheavals within the state of Israel now is the extent to which there is a reaction to a certain kind of,
but not this.
Not mainstream Orthodoxy, but ultra-Orthodox, Haredi Orthodoxy.
But not this issue. That's a separate issue, and it's one that's worth exploring. But this issue is a non-starter on the Israeli radar screen. The papers don't carry it. The people don't talk about it. The talk shows don't even touch it.
The Western Wall itself.
Western Wall itself. This is a manufactured crisis.
You are correct. Well, by the way, you've articulated it very well, and our viewers will have to, decide where they stand here. But you have explained why, from an Orthodox perspective, the tradition as it now stands at the Western Wall is important.
And more than articulated, because that's not my goal. My goal is simply to call on people to think about goodwill and peace and peanut butter, because I think that's the key.
Okay, I'm telling you again, the peanut butter cuts both ways. You are wonderful, and it has been really an honor for me to sit with you.
To be able to have somebody actually intellectually interact, I don't get that very often. I get reporters and things like that. This is a wonderful experience.
That's so kind of you to say.
It really is.
I hope we have many opportunities to talk together. You're really very, very wonderful.
Thank you.
Kol Tuva Hatzlacha.
Pleasure to meet you, Mark.
Thank you, thank you. You've been listening to Rabbi Avraham Avi Shafran, who is with Agudath Israel, and who, again, presents traditional Judaism and answers that traditional Judaism have to many of us who are not in the Orthodox community in a very sensitive, loving way. And I hope you've been moved by him as I have. If you want to be in touch with Rabbi Shafran, you can always do so by emailing me, and I will forward your emails on to him. And of course, I'd love to have any reactions you may have to the ideas expressed by Rabbi Shafran and myself. Please email me or write me this week. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.